Open the podcast bay doors, Hal.
Hello, and welcome to episode 92 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. We're continuing our deep dive into the Loki show with guest Anne Valiant. This is another podcast episode where the discussion takes longer than the show itself, so let's jump right in. Our discussion begins with the very first thing we hear, a pop song that seems to have particular meaning for this episode. The opening song is called Something in the Water by Hayley Kiyoko.
Oh, okay.
I was not familiar with it myself, but I did a quick online search and thought we should make sure to properly credit because it's a fun little bop.
It's a fun little bop. It sets up the scene very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
For what it's going into, because it is talking about, avoiding reality, relaxing, and definitely being on something else.
Exactly. Yeah, because the scene is Lady Loki and C20 in what I would consider modern clothes for today and hanging out in a restaurant of some sort.
Some sort of tacky seaside bar.
Yeah.
Someplace that is Margaritaville adjacent. It actually looks like the slums of Margaritaville. I did make a note on the costuming there. C20's t-shirt, it has sport stripes.
Okay.
The very sporty thing, but it also suggests a uniform, as opposed to Lady Loki, who's wearing a tie-dye shirt with kind of a swirl pattern, which suggests a more psychedelic, hypnotic kind of thing going, which I thought was very interesting. Also, that scrunchie that Lady Loki is wearing not only is on her wrist like it's the mid-90s, but eventually goes into her hair.
Yeah, I actually noted that specifically when it happened because it just seemed so perfect. And I like the costumes because it has a very open-ended time period that it could be.
Oh, yeah.
She could be anywhere from the 60s to today and beyond wearing that outfit. It's very indeterminate as to when this would take place, but it is sometime relatively modern to us.
Yeah, I would, again, peg it around the mid-90s personally, but maybe that's my own personal attachment.
Yeah, I wore tie-dye all throughout the early to mid-90s, and occasionally to this day if the mood strikes.
I don't think I still have anything tie-dyed, but I did tie-dye things on many an occasion back in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Because it's what you did.
But let's get back to the scene itself. This is Lady Loki's attempt to get the information out of C20 as to how many people are guarding the timekeepers, where you can find them, all that sort of stuff. And we can see that it takes her a little bit. It's not instantaneous or guaranteed that she's going to get all of that information that she wants with her technique.
It struck me as a very solid plan, but it seemed to be that Lady Loki cut to the chase too fast. Even with the time jumps, it was also all of a sudden, we're best friends. This is so much fun. How long have we known each other? Where are the timekeepers?
That's true. And I think that's a common flaw with both of the Lokis that we know.
So it's a common Loki flaw.
Yes. Going too far or getting to the root of it too quickly is something that both of these Lokis do.
They both seem very good at constructing the cards in their hands, essentially, but will overplay their hands whenever the opportunity arises.
Right.
They are looking forward to laying their cards on the table and saying, hello, look at this thing I did. I am very cool, except they do it too fast and it ruins the strategy.
Right. And we get to see it kind of pull out and cut to quote unquote real life. And it establishes that this is right before Loki enters Roxcart. And so we see that this is a little bit of a flashback to get us all up to speed on how her enchantment works to an extent. And then we get right into the action. We get the opening titles real quick, and then we're back to the TVA with Lady Loki encroaching on the apparent timekeeper's headquarters.
The golden elevators, decorated very nicely with the same little bow tie shape, which is an hourglass when it's vertical and an infinity sign when it's horizontal.
There you go. So could represent either or both.
Correct. And it makes a very nice pattern that is still consistent with mid-century modern patterns.
Mm-hmm. And it's here where I saw her tie her hair up into the scrunchie because she knows she's going into battle, and you don't want your hair getting in front of your face when that happens.
Any girl who watches a lot of action movies will take the time on any given action movie and tell you where they went for look instead of practicality.
Right.
Because literally no woman going into battle would have her hair down ever. I don't care how good it looks. Her hair would be up, out of her face, braided, bunned, something to keep it from getting in the way. They're all going to be wearing pants. I mean, this assumes that you have an action sequence that is planned, not thrust upon you.
Yeah, as long as you know you're going into battle, you're going to prep and emphasize function over form.
Exactly. Jurassic World. This is getting way off of talk, and I apologize, but in Jurassic World, you had Bryce Dallas Howard running around in really lame high heels the entire movie. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, guys, there should have been a rather literal running joke of her trying to find a pair of shoes.
Yes.
The entire thing. And it needed that running joke.
Yeah. Something to say, look, she knows this is horrible. She knows she's in the wrong footwear. Let's acknowledge it. And fine. If you want to keep her in those high heels, you can do that. But you have to acknowledge that this is not what she would be wearing if she had the choice, given the activities she's going to be doing for the next 90 minutes.
At some point, her heel should have sunk so much into the ground that she should have lost it. Once you're in soft ground, your heel goes in, and you lose your shoe. Or she should have broken her ankle at some point. Just, this is sheer actual physics. We who are movie fans, we let these things go. We understand. But there's still that little bit that goes, right thing.
On that note, if you find this sort of conversation interesting, let me recommend Jill Barrup's YouTube channel.
Oh, really?
She is trained in stage combat, and she discusses various scenes and talks a lot about wardrobe and how it would or would not function in battle. But let's get back on topic. Lady Loki very quickly finds out, which I was kind of surprised that she didn't already know, that her magic doesn't work when she's in the TVA.
And that's actually true. Yeah.
You would think a plan years in the making, as she said, she would have scouted the place a little bit better and know. That's the kind of thing that you should ask a hostage is, what kind of defenses do you have against magic?
That being said, a classic Loki flaw among all Lokis is hubris.
Yes. Overestimating your own abilities.
Oh, yeah.
But the fight that ensues between her and the guards is awesome.
All of the fight choreography through this entire episode was really good, and Lady Loki's fighting style is very consistent.
Yeah, I love how she moves with her cloak and she gets up on the walls, and all of that is so fluid and perfect to her character.
Well, and her fighting style uses her momentum and the momentum of her opponent against them.
Mhm.
It's semi-judo. I'm not an expert in martial arts at all, but I know that judo focuses on momentum.
Right. I doubt that it's one specific style. It's almost always in these movie fights, you get a mixture of whatever techniques are best for telling the story and making it look good.
And suiting the character.
Right. So after that fight scene, we get our Loki's arrival, and immediately he's like, I want my daggers back.
Exactly. Exactly. He needs his toys back. And quite frankly, he's a Loki alone. He needs weapons.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Against a hostile force, he might as well get the ones he's good with back.
And he is really good with them.
Yeah, he is.
That double hand twirl that he does
Mhm.
when he walks down the hallway and is ready to fight Lady Loki. It doesn't look like it's CGI to me. I think Tom Hiddleston can do that.
My guess is that I'd like to say that he can, and it's not CGI. If it is, it's very good CGI, but he also might have had to take it 19 times in order to
yeah,
be successful. And you've also probably got Hiddleston sitting back on the set flipping daggers right and left trying to practice. I doubt that it was a skill that he could just do.
Oh yeah, I doubt he came to the role knowing how to do that. But we saw him do that I remember him doing it in Ragnarok.
Pretty sure he did it in the first Thor as well.
Okay.
And he liked to flip and throw things in Dark World as well because he was tossing and catching a cup.
Yeah. But they get into their fight, and Loki the whole time is like, I'm fine working with you, or I can capture you. Either way, I get to the timekeepers. How do you want to do this?
He says to her at some point during that fight, you lack vision, which he has said before.
Right.
And I find this to be kind of a standard Loki distract at this point. He's going to distract them by making them think they are thinking too small. Their goal is much smaller than the potential goal could be.
Okay.
They're going to steal $5. You could steal 500. If you just think about it a little further, if you just take it another step further, which again is right back to let's overplay our hand.
Right. It's what I would do. So why aren't you doing it? And of course, that makes even more sense since he's talking to potentially another version of himself. Although we're going to get into that in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But this all goes fairly quickly. Ravonna shows up.
I'll kill him. I don't care.
Yeah, sorry, Lady Loki, but you can go ahead and kill him. I have no skin in this fight here.
Shooting the hostage will not be a problem.
Right, exactly. That little ploy doesn't work. And so our Loki grabs the tempad and says, well, we're out of here.
Bye.
The timing on that was good because they were about to get hit with one of those disintegration wands.
Yeah.
And now we get to the setting for the rest of the episode.
Lamentus 1 in 2077.
Exactly.
I find it interesting that this is happening less than 100 years in the future. It's like 55 years in the future, something like that.
Well, by the MCU timeline, that is 54 years in the future.
I was about to say that's right, because it's still 2012.
No, it's 2023. Oh, well, okay. So, what time it is a little up in the air.
That's true.
It is the alternate universe's 2012 that Loki left.
Right.
But the regular time flow of the MCU post Endgame is 2023.
Oh, okay.
Because Infinity War and the Snap takes place in 2018 and then 5 years later.
Yeah. Okay.
So, interestingly, our timeline is slowly catching up to the MCU's timeline because all of these movies and TV shows that are coming out right now, like WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier, basically take place days or maybe weeks after Endgame finished. So they're in 2023. but we're slowly moving ahead much faster than the timeline of the MCU is, because we've got these little movies that are taking place in a week's time or 2 weeks' time or something like that. And so probably by the time we hit 2023 or 2024, maybe, in our world, we will be completely caught up and will be back in sync with the MCU's timeline.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just thinking from the real world that it's just not very far away.
That's true.
It is. I will be literally 100 years old.
103. So potentially something we could both see. I could be Patrice. And I can definitely see you being the woman with the gun.
What? How? No. No. What? No. I like her. I like her very much.
Yeah. We'll get to her in a minute. But the interaction between Lady Loki and Loki when they first realize where they are and what's happening, I love the chemistry between them.
Mm-hmm.
They work off of each other very well.
Very well.
So we're a team now? Oh God, no. It's funny because Loki is constantly trying to get in good with her. He is much more willing to work with her than she is willing to work with him.
Well, I think we have two things happening here. First off, Lady Loki does not trust anyone.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, she's very paranoid. She has no trust for anyone outside of herself. And secondly, Loki, our standard issue, rogue god, he's kind of lazy. He's gonna let somebody else do the hard work if the hard work is able to be done by somebody else.
Oh yeah.
If he could talk somebody else into painting a fence for him, he will.
Yes, that is a Tom Sawyer reference for those of you who don't get that. Speaking of references that you may not get, Joel, who listeners may remember from the WandaVision episodes and being a question asker in quite a number of past episodes, he reached out to me and pointed out that this show, among all others, should be one where if you make a reference to something like Chekhov's gun, you should explain it. And he is totally right. I should not assume. And part of the motivation for the show is explaining concepts and ideas and new information to people that haven't heard it before.
Oh, do we need to explain Chekhov's gun?
So yes, let's explain Chekhov's gun really quick.
Okay. I recently had to explain this to my mother, who taught English literature for 30 odd years. I was confused that she hadn't heard of this. This is Anton Chekhov, Russian playwright, who said if you have a gun in the first act, by the end of the show, that gun goes off.
And basically what he means is that if you bring attention to something important, whether it be a prop or a character or a setting or a moment, anything that is dramatically emphasized in some way should be brought to bear by the end of the show. You don't want to waste any time on emphasizing something and then having it mean nothing.
Yes.
And so always having your moments pay off is what he was talking about. And he said it at least 3 times in various letters that he wrote to colleagues or people looking for advice or other things of that nature. So it was something he very much believed in.
Right.
And so it has become part of the lexicon, especially for dramatic theory and dramatic discussions.
Yeah. My personal favorite use is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where you have Chekhov's flamethrower.
Right.
Yeah.
But in this one, we kind of have Chekhov's tempad.
Yes.
Because Lady Loki is trying to get her hands on it. She finally does in that first little fight between her and Loki, and we find that it's out of juice.
Yes.
And so That's when they realize that they need to get to somewhere where there's a massive amount of power so that they can recharge the temp pad.
And they are slow to tell us how much power the temp pad needs. I found a lot of this episode was one Loki or the other testing the other one to see what they know already without directly asking. Who points out first where the neon sign is? I can't remember now.
Our Loki.
Our Loki. Okay, our Loki says, hello, there's this neon sign. It's got power. Go charge it.
Yeah, he asks, could that charge the temp pad? And she's like, well, maybe. And she goes and heads for it. And then she kind of plays with it a little bit, says, yeah, it looks like it's got the connections we need. Hand over the temp pad now. And he's like, no, that's not how this works. Because although she got it at first and found out that it was out of juice, Loki quickly gets it back and he magically hides it away so that she can't get to it.
Right.
And we're kind of jumping around a little bit time-wise, but I think that's okay here.
Well, we go from the tent that they appear in to the container that they run into. Mm-hmm. Between the two, Lady Loki says, don't call me a Loki.
Yes, I definitely wanted to make a note of that because that's the second time that she says, don't call me Loki. We get her new name in just a little bit.
It allows for her to create her own identity. And again, a lot of the show is about the identity.
Right.
And she's more aware, she is aware of the TVA and the timekeepers and all that, as opposed to our Loki, who has just been introduced to it and therefore has not necessarily started to forge an identity away from the timekeeper timeline of who that Loki is. I will note when they head for the container, which I think is the on top of the mine shaft, Loki opens the door for her and sends her in first, which I thought was interesting because, gentlemanly behavior, or she's going to set the trap off first.
Little column A, little column B.
Befits both a prince and a rogue.
Yes. And it's in that shelter that Lady Loki tries to enchant our Loki and finds this is her second time being kind of impotent with her powers because apparently our Loki's mind is just too strong.
Sure, that's the problem. It could be that, he has a very strong mind. It's also then that he was probably trained not to allow interference.
Well, that doesn't contradict that his mind is too strong. It just means that he lifted weights mentally rather than just being born mentally muscled.
Right. And while we are in the shelter, she introduces herself as Sylvie.
Actually, slight correction.
Oh.
They leave the shelter. They are walking to town when she gives her new name.
That's right.
But now that we've got this new name, and I'll stop calling her Lady Loki and I'll start calling her Sylvie, let's talk about who Sylvie is in the comics.
Ooh.
Because there is a Sylvie who has a connection to Loki that has appeared since the early aughts, and maybe mid-aughts. Anyways, Sylvie Lashton is a teenager in Broxton, Oklahoma.
I remember Broxton, Oklahoma.
And around the same time that Asgard shows up over Broxton, she suddenly starts getting powers. What she doesn't know, but we eventually find out, and she eventually finds out, is that she was given these powers by Loki. And she basically has magical powers very similar to the Asgardian villainess known as the Enchantress. And in fact, when Sylvie discovers her powers, she moves to New York in order to find other people like her, and she starts calling herself the Enchantress after that original Thor villainess, and starts trying to speak like an Asgardian does in the comics. She puts on the faux Shakespearean with all the thous and these, but she doesn't quite get them right necessarily. And so to a knowledgeable observer, they recognize her as not being Asgardian. But to the average person, they think of her as being part of Thor's crew, basically. And the time period that we're talking about is the same time in Marvel Comics that is right after Secret Invasion, when Norman Osborn was in charge of the government's superheroes. He was given almost free reign over what had been S.H.I.E.L.D. but was now Hammer. And in addition to creating his own team of Avengers, he also created his own team of Young Avengers, also known as the Young Masters, because they're more closely aligned to the Masters of Evil than they are to the Young Avengers. And Sylvie is one of the people who was recruited for that young team. But she and the rest of that team run into the actual Young Avengers, and she's like, can I be on your team instead? I like your team better. And sure enough, they're like, yeah, sure. They do kind of a tryout for her, and they let her in. But then the realization about the origin of her powers comes about. And they figure out that one of the things Loki likes to do when he comes down to Earth is make little traps for any team that has Avengers in their name. And Sylvie is one of those. He specifically gave her powers to try to mess with the Avengers, or in this case, the Young Avengers. And as soon as the Young Avengers realize this, they're like, no, sorry, you're out. So she goes back to the Young Masters and has various adventures from there. But unfortunately for her, the last time we saw her, the original Enchantress found her and said, no, you don't take my name, and banished her to one of the other 10 realms, and we don't know where. And basically said, you know what? If you're able to get out of this, we might be friends. But until then, see ya.
Translation, you are hanging around there until a Marvel writer goes, we
haven't heard from her in a while. And so the Loki writers have acknowledged that Sylvie here in the show is at least partially inspired by this Sylvie from the comics.
Right.
Now, whether or not she is still a Loki, or if she was created by a different Loki, or how she works exactly, that's still up in the air. There's still a lot of mystery surrounding her at this point. But you can see that her power set is much closer to the Enchantress, who has magical powers and often uses them to make people fall in love with her or come under her spell in one way or another. And so Sylvie's power set is much closer to the Enchantress than it is to the Lokis that we know.
All right. That's a good use of a character that's been, tucked away for a while.
Not too long, though. Like I said, she was created less than 20 years ago.
Well, and if they kind of go with a similar backstory that, she's not necessarily a Loki, she's some sort of Loki adjacent development.
Right.
That would fit with the MCU kind of streamlining of a lot of things. I mean, there's so much stuff from the Marvel backlog. You cannot use it all.
Right.
But you can pull the bits and kind of clean them up in order to bring them in.
Yeah. And another thing this does potentially is put another one of the Young Avengers into play. Because as I discussed in WandaVision at least a couple of times, it seems like they are working their way towards a Young Avengers team. In the comics, both the Enchantress was a Young Avenger for a brief amount of time, but the other character who was in the second iteration of the Young Avengers was Kid Loki. There was a period of time where Loki de-aged himself, and that was one of the periods where he had the broken horn.
Oh.
and was
Ostensibly good.
ostensibly good, still being Loki and still being very trickstery, but at the same time was helping out the heroes rather than the villains. So back to the show, there was one line that I definitely loved and wanted to point out before they get to town. In their name discussion, Sylvie asks, "What makes a Loki a Loki?"
And our Loki replies with independence, authority, and style. Now, let me note, I feel like two of those semi-contradict each other.
Independence and authority?
Yes. I'm sorry, if you've taken on authority, you've given up a chunk of your independence because you're now in charge of somebody or something. You have greater responsibilities than your own actions. And therefore, you can't just run off and do whatever the heck you want.
At least you're not supposed to. And I think that's one of Loki's fatal flaws.
Correct.
Is that even when he gets himself into authority, he's still
bad at it.
He's bad at it because he keeps wanting to do whatever he wants to do.
Yep.
When he's king of Asgard and all he does is sit around on his throne all day watching people reenact his greatest hits. And then as soon as Thor shows up, he's like, well, oh shit, I'm caught now.
Exactly. Somebody who is good at being an authority realizes it's a lot of work.
Yes.
And that their needs and desires are second string to the needs and desires of whatever they're in charge of. So you cannot be good at being in charge if all you care about is you. So it makes that Loki is more of a narcissist. He wants worship and adoration. He doesn't want to do the work.
Yeah. And you can tell how much of a narcissist he is in that when you bring up 3 points for evidence,
yes,
you always end with what you think is the strongest.
And I would argue that style might be his strongest.
Oh, I would agree with that too. But I think it also points out how self-absorbed he is in that his strongest point is that I'm stylish. I'm uniquely me.
Well, if we want to take a moment when we're speaking of Loki's style, I do have the patty cake swoon scale for this episode.
Perfect. What does Patty say?
The patty cake swoon scale for episode 3, Lamentus 1. 10 out of 10, you guys. This is my Loki, swinging those daggers, being charming, acting like an Asgardian. Yeah, I'm here for this episode. By the way, Patty is totally a girly girl, so de-butch that by like 20 degrees, and that would be much more Patty. But yeah, Patty was apparently quite taken with it. And I have to agree, this was an excellent display of Loki, both in character and physique, because the jacket comes off at some point, and I think the shirt got tighter somehow.
Let's move on to the hut. We've mentioned it briefly, but we get to see both Loki's management styles, shall we say. As Loki suggests diplomacy and guile.
Which are the same thing in a positive light and a negative light. Pretty much the same damn thing, though. Anyway, she goes for not diplomacy.
Just kicks the door straight down.
And then, kablam!
And I think we all take enjoyment in her comeuppance at this moment. Because for the most part, I think at least, she has been shown to be more competent than our Loki has been.
Yes.
And so it was good to take her down a peg here and just get immediately blown back. And our Loki is like, well, that was fun. Now let's try things my way.
Now, we will notice before he does try it his way, he does take this little glance into the hut and sees the photo, which is American Gothic Moon Edition.
Yes. But it shows kind of the limits of his power. He can't pluck an image from her head of who her husband, lover, something was, but he can see a picture, and just from that picture, he can imitate them down to their voice.
Yeah, he just appears as the guy and, of course, says, the wrong thing.
Yes. Because he doesn't know anything about the guy at this point.
Knows what he looks like. That's it.
So he says, "You're as beautiful as ever." Bam. Shot. So even though they're both shot, they do actually get what they need out of this encounter.
Yep.
Because they're able to find out where everyone else has gone and where the Ark is, which Sylvie says should have enough power to actually recharge the pad.
Means that this entire episode is chasing a MacGuffin. Yeah, a MacGuffin, by the way, is just an object that everybody wants.
Yes.
Is the object of the thing. Whether it's meaningful or not, it is the object that, or the thing that everybody wants and is chasing.
Yeah. I tend to think of most MacGuffins as their nature is unintegral to the plot, usually.
Yes.
The stereotypical MacGuffin is in Pulp Fiction and is the briefcase.
The briefcase.
We don't know what is in the briefcase. For the purposes
so many things theorized.
Oh yeah, there's theories from Marcellus's soul to just a big ass diamond. But for the purposes of the story, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All that matters is it's important to the characters that they get it and bring it back safely.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what a MacGuffin usually is. So I think the power source is not necessarily a MacGuffin because it is integral to their
That's true.
To their journey.
Yeah.
It's not just a thing, it is how they can continue on. Yeah, it's how they can escape. It is integral to their survival in a way that is specific to what it is. They don't care about a specific object. It is an idea, and wherever that idea takes them is where they will go.
Right. And where they will go is on a train.
Yes. This time they reverse the order of their strategies. So instead of Sylvie going first and getting shot, Loki goes first and almost makes it. Gets them at least past the main crowd and to the entrance to the train without much trouble.
As they're approaching the train, Loki asks Sylvie what her plan is, and she says, enchant a guard and get him to take us onto the train. And Loki kind of uses that, but says, well, let's not enchant a guard. I'll just be a guard. And by the way, sweater armor?
Yeah, that is the ugliest armor I have ever seen.
I don't get it.
Patty, I would have taken a point off of the swoon scale just for that horrible...
I mean, it fit him well, but...
Did it? It went past his butt at one point. And
yeah, but I think it did on all of them. That was by design.
Yeah, but...
that was a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, but it is not a good look for anyone.
No. I question this choice.
Yeah.
I mean, and what's it made out of? That it's armor. Are you knitting Kevlar? I mean,
that's 50 years from now, maybe.
Anyways,
they get to the train entrance, and because they don't have tickets, which immediately put me in mind of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
No ticket.
They have to turn to Sylvie's method, and she does exactly what she said she was going to. Enchants a guard and gets them to escort them on.
See, they make a very effective team.
Yes, I completely agree. And I hope we get more of them together as this series goes on. I still want Mobius to come back.
Yeah.
Like I said, I love the chemistry between Sylvie and Loki in this episode, but I also loved the chemistry between Loki and Mobius. And so I would love to have those three together with their various methods and motivations and see how that all shakes out. But we get them onto the train, and now we get some nice character moments here.
Even before they've settled down, we get this strange little power struggle over seats.
Now, speaking personally, I totally get where Loki is coming from. I hate being seated backwards on a train. I unfortunately am acrophobic, so I cannot fly without being drugged up to the point of needing somebody with me to walk me from place to place when we're getting on and off the plane. So if I have to travel long distance these days, I almost always do it by train. And if there is at all an option of facing forwards or facing backwards, I am facing forwards because facing backwards will get me motion sick potentially.
Yeah, it messes with your head, and I tend to get motion sick as well. I have trouble with boats, so yeah, no, I get it, and it's unnatural. It feels weird.
Yeah, but once we get past that little power struggle, we do get some genuine discussion between the two.
I find it that this discussion is a 75-25 split. Loki is spilling his guts. Not completely, but Sylvie is not. She's so much more guarded.
He is definitely a lot more open during this discussion than she is. She is very untrusting of anyone. Yeah, I mean, she pretty much comes out and says that when Loki suggests she takes a nap.
Oh yeah, there's no way she's sleeping.
Well, she eventually does, but no way she's going to voluntarily. It is only because she is absolutely exhausted that she ends up falling asleep. But we do learn here that she taught herself how to enchant people.
Or at least that's what she says. I'm inclined to believe her.
Yeah, I think she is being as honest as she's going to be in these scenes. We're given no real reason to believe that she is lying. But this conversation and other little bits of dialogue we get here and there brings up again, how is she a Loki variant? Where on a timeline did she split off? If she doesn't remember her mother, she taught herself magic. If she doesn't remember her mother at all, then this split off from the original timeline when she was still a child.
Yes.
So if that's true, how was she able to, as a child, escape the TVA and find her way to an apocalypse somewhere and to hide herself and become the person that she is now? Again, the whole idea of how different variants are from their original timeline version does not make sense given the explanations that we've been given about how these alternate timelines work.
Right.
Oh, real quick, while we're on the subject of alternate Lokis, I do want to bring up a little factoid that I learned between last episode and this one. The Tour de France trophy was stolen in 2018 and has not been recovered.
Oh, that's what that one is. Okay. Loki's the one who broke into the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum too, right? There's some very good, valuable paintings somewhere in Asgard.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure he has the original Mona Lisa as well. The one in the Louvre is just a copy. Yeah. Anywhere there is an unsolved mystery in our universe, Loki did it.
Loki did it.
It was Loki all along.
Well, and the answers that we don't have about Sylvie, I mean, they only talk about their mothers. There's no mention of Sylvie's father, or if, anybody is a birth parent. I mean, at this rate, Sylvie could have been whisked off to Hogwarts at a very young age, and that's self-taught means, I went to school for it.
Right, and is this Loki also a frost giant, biologically speaking? We don't know. It doesn't seem like she would be, but I don't know. Again, by the rules of how these variants are supposed to work, she should be.
Right.
But she is so different from the Loki that we know that it could very easily be that she is a human who was adopted by the Asgardians rather than a frost giant.
Right. Could be that we're dealing with a Loki offspring, even maybe.
Right.
Nah, that's pushing it.
And we get the dialogue here all about love.
As Loki starts drinking, and she, of course, does not.
Yes. And we get a confirmation of Loki's bisexuality or maybe pansexuality.
Yep.
If you go by Norse mythology, he is definitely pansexual.
Yep.
Because he has, in Norse mythology, he is, I should probably say, they are the mother of Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse. And Loki gave birth to Sleipnir via the traditional method of mating with a horse and then giving birth to that offspring. Loki disguised themselves as a mare and said, "How you doing?"
God bless ancient gods. I mean...
And Loki is also the father of the Fenris wolf.
Yep.
And again, that came from Loki saying, "Well, let's be a wolf for a little while. Hey, that other wolf looks hot." So it is definitely established in Norse mythology that Loki is pansexual, and it seems to be confirmed in the MCU that Loki is also pansexual.
At least bisexual.
Right.
That is the floor of where we are starting, where pansexuality is much more likely. But it's also a difference of acceptability between ancient religions and ancient mythology, where, oh my God, was everybody turning into something else in order to get laid, as opposed to modern sensibilities where we're a little like, about that.
Yeah. There were no Puritans in ancient Norway.
They didn't survive. There were.
At least not Christian Puritans.
No.
Which founded this country and thus created a lot of our hang-ups. But we get love is hate, love is mischief, and love is something I might have to have another drink to think about.
The flourish that brings forth the parchment and quill, that is nicely done.
Agreed.
Maybe love is hate. Oh, I gotta write that down. Whew. Yeah, no, nicely done.
He's definitely mocking her there with the, oh yeah, that's a deep sentiment there. Love is hate. No one's ever had that thought before.
Yeah. Again, they kind of like the dichotomies, though, around here.
Yeah.
You know, authority and independence. Well, that's two opposites. Love is hate. I got two more opposites.
It's back to the doublespeak of 1984 that you
have been really
referencing in the previous episodes.
Ah, look at that. Look at that. It's come back to haunt us. War is peace.
But after their ruminations on love,
Loki asks if Sylvie has anyone in her life, and she says, yes, I have a long-term relationship with a postman, as she's running between apocalypses. And I have many questions on this, and I'm going to let this one play out.
I think she was being sarcastic, but at the same time, I love the idea of her and Kevin Costner.
Yeah, and that is post-apocalyptic.
That is post-apocalyptic, and Kevin Costner plays a postman in the movie of the same name. So I could see it. But getting back to this show, Sylvie does eventually fall asleep despite her protests and wakes up to Loki drunkenly singing in what the subtitles say is in Asgardian, but is actually Norwegian. Now, the only bit that I got the translation for is the solo bit when he shushes everyone. Most of the chorus is in English.
Yeah.
It's just when she sings "Come Home." But then the verses go into Asgardian/Norwegian. And so a person who knows Norwegian and watched the show translated the slow verse, which is, in stormy black mountains I wander alone. Across glaciers I make my way. In the apple garden, stems in the end, waiting and singing. When are you coming home?
That's pretty. And very typical for a sea shanty kind of drinking song, sad drinking song kind of thing.
Yes. And this is not Tom Hiddleston's first role where singing has been required. He played Hank Williams in I Saw the Light.
So we know the man can carry a tune in a bucket, including a drinking song. And I mean, those aren't designed to be hard to sing. I mean, the entire, oh, not the entire train car, but a good amount of the train car is singing the chorus with him.
Right.
As these things are designed to do.
Right. You make the chorus very simple in both melody and lyrics.
Yeah. And by the third go around, everybody's singing along.
Yeah. And Sylvie notices right away that Loki has lost his uniform.
Yes.
And is back in his TVA outfit.
Thank God.
And one of the passengers is obviously annoyed by Loki's performance and leaves. But then Loki finishes his song, finishes his drink, and then imitates his brother.
Yep. Yep. He smashes the glass just like Thor smashed the coffee cup.
Yes.
And I think one of the Warriors 3 did that at one point too. Smashed a glass and demanded another.
I want to say
maybe.
I want to say he like lifted it up as if going to, and somebody stopped him.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think we got a moment like that because we got Thor doing it, and then we got the Warriors 3 and the humans who were there are like, wait, we know where this is going.
Stop. No, don't break the glassware.
But yeah, I just love that moment because, again, Loki and Thor are not as far apart as they often claim to be. They have more in common than probably either of them would like to admit. And just all the dialogue here in this scene is brilliant. Sylvie accuses him of being drunk.
Yep.
And his response is, no, I'm full. Now, mind you, I'm very full. Full of what?
Exactly. Well, apparently sweet little things that go really well with figgy port, but there's no more figgy port. We are out of figgy port. And I don't know what that dessert was, but it looked pretty tasty. It's very sad that he dropped it. He was very sad that he dropped it. And we've now got this very cheerful nihilism coming from Loki. If no one cares, it's the end of the world.
Right.
Party.
It's very similar to his moment in Pompeii.
Yep. World's ending, might as well party.
Yeah.
And release the goats or drop the desserts.
Right. Well, he didn't mean to drop the desserts. He meant to release the goats.
Yes, that is true. One of my favorite phrases in this episode comes from the scene where Sylvie calls them the omniscient fascists.
Okay.
Oh no, I thought that was funny, but that's just me. It has no other meaning other than omniscient fascists. Big Brother's watching.
Apparently.
See?
And I loved Loki's love is a dagger metaphor. I thought that was actually gorgeous.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a solid metaphor until it gets away from him.
Until he gets to the very end, it was perfect. It can be used up close or far away. You can see yourself in it. It's beautiful, but it can make you bleed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as someone who has hit both the highs and lows of love multiple times.
Yeah.
But after that, we get the guards arriving. And again, the fight choreography here is perfect.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's so great. Seeing Sylvie use her diadem, I used the right word, as a weapon. You have a problem there?
Oh, yeah. This is an overall problem. This is, again, the problem of her hair's down, that's dumb kind of thing. What is holding that diadem on when she's wearing it?
Gravity.
No. How? No, it doesn't rest there. It rests at the center of the forehead where there's not the surface is vertical, not horizontal. And
what about
there's not enough of a
what
curve.
About the back? How far? I didn't see how far back.
You see, if you look at most diadems, especially the ones that are designed not as actual jewelry, but as movie props.
Okay.
They only go to right about above the ears. They don't go all the way back. And a traditional diadem, usually about 50-50 chance it's going to actually connect in the back. If it does connect in the back, then it has plenty of room to sit. Mm-hmm. But if you shake your head too much, that thing's going, unless it is somehow attached.
Well, it has to be because she's running at certain points.
Uh-huh. how it is attached to the actress is probably more or less spirit gum. There's something that is physically sticking it there, and then they edit it cleverly so that they de-spirit gum it, and then she holds it and then pulls it from her face in order to start using it as a weapon. Because otherwise there's not really much doing the work, at least nothing that's not going to give you a migraine. Because if there's something that is pushing your head that strongly, again, in the area right above your ears, then it's going to start hurting after a while. And our Sylvie and Wonder Woman have, quite frankly, too much work to do to be allowing their jewelry to give them a headache.
Well, both of those characters are stronger than the average person, and so can probably handle that kind of pressure without it giving them a headache.
Or it's just part of their daily go-to. I don't know. Anyway, again, this is every woman in the world shaking her tiny fist going, that doesn't really work like that. Anybody who wears a tiara, a proper tiara, which is the one that rests on the very top of the head, but isn't like a big full crown and usually sparkly, those things are usually attached to your hair.
Okay.
If you're wearing them for any length of time, like bridal or a quinceañera, something like that. They're like stuck in with enough hairpins and hairspray to build walls. I'm just saying, you can't just take the thing off your head and start beating people with it. Because if you could, we'd all be wearing diadems all the time.
All right. Well, Anne apparently gets into a lot of fights.
No, I've now thought about how I can use clothing as a weapon on multiple occasions. I've never thought of that. How dare you? I didn't design an outfit for that. No, how dare you? I did. It was one of my final fashion school projects.
Nice.
Anyway.
But while Sylvie is using her diadem and her sword, Loki is using his magic. And something I've noticed in this and then previously in the fight scene in episode 2 is Loki will use telekinesis, which he never really did in the previous movies. So I think in the movies he was kind of holding back. He always likes to keep his secrets when he can.
Right. And
so here, and then in a later scene, even more obviously, he is using his full powers because he's at the point where secrets are out the window. Survival is what's important.
Most likely he's been using his telekinesis in very small, subtle ways that maybe even he isn't necessarily aware that he's using it. I mean, every dagger flip that hits perfectly, everything that is like a near miss. Maybe that's a little bit of telekinesis influencing that just enough to make sure it works.
Right. Although we don't see, up until this point, we haven't seen that green energy burst out that comes with that power.
Yeah, that's true. Though we don't see a green energy burst when he does the mega telekinesis later.
True. But at the same time, his back is to the camera when that happens.
Also true. Yeah.
So it could easily be hidden behind his body. But the fight does not go their way, unfortunately.
Nope. And out the window they go.
Yeah, although I'm kind of surprised that they didn't run into the guard that was thrown out of the window first. Although it's more likely that he didn't survive because he's not a god. So Loki gets thrown off the train, and Sylvie says, well, crap, he has the tempad, and takes off after him. And then here's where we find that the tempad did not survive the fall.
Nope.
Like the two of them did.
Yeah, tempads are not gods.
No. We pointed out in the earlier episodes that the technology of the TVA is very retro in many ways, and fragility is apparently one of those.
Yeah.
And I really liked Sylvie's scream in frustration and seeing her magic just literally explode out of her. That's not something you see that often, and it makes sense for somebody who wields magic naturally, somebody that didn't study and it just kind of came to them. And so those emotional outbursts are also associated with the outbursts of actual power from her.
It makes sense to me.
Just little moments that I think add to the character and show the kind of attention to detail that the Marvel writers are so good at.
Well, it doesn't help that Loki was kind of goading her a little bit, that they had this little, I was being hedonistic. I'm more hedonistic than you are. Followed by him accusing her of, having a glorious purpose to do whatever she's planning to do, but you can't beat the timekeepers, which is essentially negging the poor girl.
True. Again, we don't know what Sylvie's full plan is.
Nope.
But apparently it has something to do with getting to the timekeepers. But is she going to just kill them? Is she going to, what is her plan there?
Yeah. Unknown at this juncture, because she again is really good at not giving away her plans.
Yeah, she doesn't want to tell Loki or anybody anything that she doesn't have to.
I mean, Loki even tries to get out of her how enchantments work, but she's not giving him anything. She thanks him for the tactical advantage. She's like, I told you everything, and she says, yeah, thanks. Nice job spilling your guts, dude.
Yeah. And I was going to bring that moment up. It happens immediately after they're coming up with their new plan to hijack the Ark and then get it successfully off of the moon, which apparently did not happen in the original timeline. So after that, thanks for the tactical advantage moment that you just brought up, she actually does open up a little bit and explains how enchantment works, which is pretty simple. She has to make physical contact, and then she can take control of their mind. Now, some people have stronger minds, and others are weaker. And so for the stronger minds, she has to use their memories and create some sort of fantasy to keep them under control.
And this is where we get tonight's big reveal.
Yes. This surprised me. I was not expecting this. I mean, the opening scene gives us some sort of clue towards that, but if you had asked me in the first 2 episodes,
right,
I would not have expected this at all. It turns out that C20 and all of the TVA, as far as we know, are other variants. So I wonder if that's what being reset means.
Well, it could be. You get hauled back to the TVA, you get your mind wiped, essentially, or repressed, because Sylvie says that C20's mind was a wreck.
Right.
She really had to go looking to find the sub-rent Margaritaville that apparently C20 has a strong attachment to.
Yeah. So it's not wiped completely, but your mind gets so messed up by what the TVA does to you that you don't consciously remember your time before the TVA.
And that, of course, contradicts what Mobius told Loki.
Right.
Mobius told Loki that they were all created by the Timekeepers when the Timekeepers started the TVA, which indicates that this story of a peaceful ending when the end of time comes also is probably a load of crap.
Yeah, I think this is more evidence towards my potential theory that the Timekeepers are potentially the Time Twisters.
Yeah.
Or some other villainous force that is not the happy trio of space lizards keeping the sacred timeline going for the good of the multiverse or the good of the universe. Anyways, it's 5 minutes to launch.
Oy. It's a really close timeline there.
Yeah, and this is a tight episode too.
Yeah.
This episode is only 37 minutes long, and that's including credits.
And there are a lot of credits. So essentially, you've only got 30 minutes of action.
Yeah. So it's 5 minutes to launch when they get to where the Ark is located. And again, we get this great action scene where the planet above them splits in two and huge meteors start raining down. And yeah, Loki is able to use his telekinesis to send a tower, basically an entire building, back up.
Back to where it belongs. The design of this town is, and the population of this town, I find very interesting. I'm sorry we couldn't hang out here.
Yeah, it looked a lot like various towns that we see in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, there's a lot of Guardians of the Galaxy influence. It's very neon cyberpunk, which it's also a port town. So of course it's going to be a party town. That just what they do.
Mhm.
And if you really dig that design, go look up Meow Wolf. It's an experience. It's in Santa Fe and in Vegas, and it's amazing. And Denver too. I think there's one in Denver. Anyway, but it's a lot of also neon chaos. The writing that we see throughout this town and the first town that they were in, is that from Guardians? Because it looked familiar.
It did look familiar. It might be from Guardians. It looked kind of generic to me, though.
Okay.
I didn't note it as something specific that I had seen before. You know, it's not as distinct as, say, Arabesh from Star Wars is.
Right.
Where you see that font and you immediately know.
Star Wars. I will also note in the first town we were in, there was also Cyrillic. Things were in Russian.
Okay.
Well, theoretically it was Russian, or whoever else is using a Cyrillic alphabet. Usually it's Russian.
Right.
And the coloration of this whole episode was really well done. It was all purples and greens.
Very purples and yeah. Purple is my color. So I noted that right away, that the entire color scheme of Lamentis as a whole was very purple.
And consistently so. And the light changed consistently throughout the episode as well. That it was brighter when they arrived and it was darker by the time that the episode ended.
Yes.
It's just nice when we have filmmakers who pay attention to these things.
Well, in this case, I have to assume that they were on a set for all of this. Yeah. None of the, maybe the first bit where they're running across from the hut that they first entered Lamentis on, running from there to the shelter.
Yeah.
That may have been outdoors in some sort of quarry, that probably the same quarry that Doctor Who used throughout its classic run. But other than that, I think everything we saw was filmed on a set.
Yeah.
And so unlike the Ren Fair scene,
right,
they had complete control over their environment. And so there was never any worries about clouds or
or having the shoot at the same or at the correct time every day in order to get the lighting correct.
Lighting exactly right and having it match. Yeah, they were on a set for all of this, I assume. So it was very easy for them to make this all match the timing so that the sun was going down as they were traveling. But despite all of their best efforts, they don't even make it to the Ark, let alone get on it and have it take off.
Well, the Ark doesn't make it off the planet.
No, it sticks to the original apocalyptic timeline, and everyone on Lamentis is fated to die.
Right. Well, and nobody notes what happens to the Ark, essentially. Sylvie says at some point, the Ark doesn't make it, but it wasn't necessarily that it blew up before it even got a chance to lift off. It didn't make it. According, now we know it blew up before it lifted off.
Yeah, that's true. Because how would you know what happened?
Yeah, you wouldn't. You just know that the moon disintegrated because it got crashed into by another planet and nobody made it off.
Yeah. And Loki and Sylvie have very different reactions to this. Sylvie just turns around and walks away and is like, all right, well, I'm done. But Loki just stares in disbelief. And again, it's one of those kind of character moment things where even without dialogue, you say so much about who these two people are in their reaction to a major setback, apparent death, but obviously we know that the show is continuing for more episodes, so somehow they're going to make it off of Lamentis. But yeah, the two reactions are so dichotomous.
Right. Well, and Loki's used to getting out of things.
Yeah. If there's anything that he's known for, it's escaping.
Yeah.
His plans may not go as he wanted, but he almost always finds a way out in the end.
Worked at the end of Endgame.
Yep.
Actually, I think it'd be mid-Endgame,
Yeah,
technically.
And again, we get a very fitting song for the end credits. This one is called
Dark Moon.
Yes, did you look it up?
I looked it up too.
Okay.
I didn't look it up. I watched the credits, and yeah, Dark Moon by Bonnie Guitar, who I've never heard of. I just knew it wasn't Patsy Cline, but it kind of seemed like it should be Patsy Cline.
Yeah, apparently other people have done versions of this song, including I think Elvis Presley.
Ooh.
Yeah, but Dark Moon, considering where they were for most of this episode.
Uh-huh. Now, did you notice during the credit sequence that the credit sequence was the same as it always was, except there were actors missing? The actors who did not appear this episode, like Owen Wilson, they didn't get credits for this episode because they weren't in it.
Okay.
But the sequence flowed just like it always does. It was just empty. It was just the shot, which is kind of spooky.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that, part of it was that they just didn't want to re-edit it, but there's also a certain amount of leaving those spaces blank.
Yeah.
Is just kind of creepy.
It is very odd, very unusual for a closing credits sequence.
Yeah.
And it's just unusual in general to leave out actors who are considered to be main characters. A lot of times you'll see, if you go to IMDb and you look at an episode, that an actor is missing from that episode, but is one of the regulars on the show, it will say that actor, and then it will say credit only.
Right.
So it's very unusual to leave them out of the credits entirely.
Right.
But at the same time, there are only 6 episodes.
Yeah.
And so it kind of leaves it up in the air as to, well, who will reappear? If we see that Owen Wilson is in the credits for every single episode, then we say, oh, well, we know he's coming back. But if he's not in the credits for episodes he's not in, then who knows?
Who knows?
I mean, I hope he comes back.
Me too.
And his jet ski.
And his jet ski. And the jet ski he rode out on. Yeah, I found the absence of names in the spaces where they should have been just kind of eerie.
Yeah. Credit sequences are usually so tight, you don't have empty space like that for the most part. Having reached the ending credits, that pretty much wraps up our discussion. Thanks again to Anne for taking the time to go on this deep dive with me. Episode 4 of Loki is already out, and while I've watched it already, I haven't had a chance to discuss it with Anne yet as of this recording. But there's a whole lot going on in it for us to talk about, and if you haven't watched it yet, be sure you stay past the first set of credits, or you might miss something important. I would love to hear more from my listeners, either with questions they want answered in a future episode, or just feedback on the show in general. Anything you'd like to say, you can get that to me by emailing welcome2geektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome2, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link if you prefer to ask more anonymously. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome-to-geektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown, where for just $1 per month, you get access to scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, which helps other people find the show, so we can all tell them,
Welcome to Geektown, population us.
Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips are the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.